15, so I will be keeping people to a schedule. I know that Lisa Konecki is coming. She's running 10 minutes late. And I know that Chris Waterson is excused. I don't know where Mark or Representative Serpa are. But could you please take attendance? Thank you very much.
Chairwoman Carson.
Here.
Representative Serpa. Dr. James Opalach. Mr. Mark Stankiewicz. Miss Lisa Konecki.
She is coming. There she is. She just walked in.
Just in time. Mr. Chris Watterson. Miss Myrna George. Mr. Mark Mayo. Mr. Michael Walker.
Here.
Miss Ann Souter.
Here. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody to our last case study for this study commission. For those folks that are here for the first time, the study commission has been meeting since about October or September, and the purpose is to begin a conversation about the economic impact of flooding and sea rise on Rhode Island. And in order for us to tackle that discussion, we went about it by looking at 3 case studies. We first examined the economic impact that Sandy had on Westerly. In our last meeting, we evaluated Providence Port, and today is our final case study, which is Newport. So before we get started on that, there were a few little housekeeping matters I wanted to take care of. I wanted to ask the members of the commission, we have one more meeting after this, after which we will be required to submit a report to the House. And I'm going to ask the commission members between now and February 10th to draft some kind of a response document about your experience on the commission. The staff will send out a reminder on this, exactly what we're looking for. It can be as short as 1 page or as long as 2 pages. And I think the kinds of things that I'm asking you to reflect upon would be the observations you've made over the course of this commission, your concerns, the things that you learned that we've learned some alarming things about risk and exposure in the state. Further questions, I mean, clearly there's no way that we could finally address this subject in 6 one-hour meetings. What areas of further research do you think that we should take on? I know I've toyed with a few ideas about that myself, continuing more research on this because the policy options may not be clear yet. So, if there's any additional research that the House should be doing. And I think also, who would you like us to share this information with? We want to make sure it gets in the hands of particular state and community leaders. We've seen issues around municipal issues. We've seen issues around state issues as well as federal issues. So I'll work with Kendra over the next week. It doesn't have to be that long. I'm looking more for reflection than anything else, and I will put it in the final reports. So there's that. And front page of today's Providence Journal is record temperatures last year in this country, and around the world, actually. And I think we have the press article somewhere here. So front page today, more news about the climate, as there is every day. This case study is obviously very dear to me because it is my district. And one of the reasons that I decided to run for office was because I felt an obligation to work, particularly in my neighborhood, the Point, to really begin a discussion about the economic risks that we were facing as a neighborhood. I felt an obligation to work with my neighbors around remedies for retaining property value for them, as well as for the city as a tax base. We have a tremendous dependence on the water for marine trades, fishing, and tourism in Newport, and we really should be starting to have a conversation about what the possibilities here are for economic risk. I live in the Point neighborhood of Newport, which has the highest concentration of colonial homes in the country. So we have a concern about the maintenance and the preservation of historical property, which is not only important to our cultural heritage, but it's also important to our tourism industry. So that's why I decided to do a case study model so that we could really look closely at different areas of the state. And I'm thrilled today to have folks from Newport come and share the stories of what it's been like for us in Newport and the changes that we see in Newport. So our first presentation is Melissa Barker, who is the GIS Coordinator for the City of Newport. She's going to tell us a little bit through her magical maps exactly what's been going on and what might happen going forward. Thank you, Melissa.
Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Melissa Barker. I'm the GIS Coordinator for the City of Newport, which basically means I do database mapping, database-driven mapping and statistical analysis. So I brought this presentation together, running a lot of, it's based on mapping. I've done a lot of work digitizing the old historic atlases, dealing with a historic city. A lot of our problems are based on our historic data. In 1777, we have a Charles Blaskowitz survey of the harbor area, and as you can see the outline of the current shoreline in the darker blue. The flood zones are in the lighter blue, and in the area circled in the yellow, that shows that originally that section of the point where the Marriott and the Visitor Center was originally open water. And then you can see in 1876, they put in a rail line, filling in parts of that, creating 3 ponds. In 1893, they filled in more land. And by 1907, that area that we now know as solid land is completely filled in. The problem with that is you now have almost $5 million worth of buildings on that infilled land. You have a lot of valuable properties, which then you can see that we regularly have flooding problems in that area. These were from Superstorm Sandy, these pictures here. We also have similar issues down by Spencer Park. That's down off of Wellington Avenue. You can see in 1876, this lower portion of the harbor was actually an open inlet. And then in 1893, someone filled it in and put housing lots there. Which you can see, we always have flooding issues in that area. Mother Nature tries to reclaim what was once hers. We have 4,574,000 acres of parcels in Newport. Of that, 53.76% of our parcels touch the floodplain, which means they would be affected if the flooding happens. Of those parcels, about 54% are residential. A little over 25% are commercial or business, and thankfully, almost 21% are residential or open space. We have 11,787 structures in Newport. Of those, about almost 17% are in the flood zone. When you combine the property values and the structure values, that's a pretty large number. It's almost $4 billion worth of potential property damage in Newport. I also did analysis using E911 site data to find the businesses in Newport. I was able to locate 585 businesses. Of those, 39.5% are retail, so on and so forth, with a food service, professional services, and hotel and guest facilities. Because the City of Newport collects room taxes, I was able to run some economic numbers on the hotel and guest facilities. We have 128 registered hotels/guest houses in Newport. Of those, 37 are in the floodplain. It doesn't sound like that big of a percentage, but when you look at the scale, the larger facilities, the Hyatts, the Marriotts, the Wyndhams, are actually in the floodplain. So 55.4% of all total rooms in Newport are in the floodplain. Within a year's tax collection data, if these businesses were to be affected, the city could stand to lose about 53% of taxes collected from these institutions. The industry as a whole in Newport would lose about the same, with a 53%. So that's the economic potential of loss if these structures are damaged and these businesses have to shut down. We have over 7,000 feet of roadway maintained in our databases in Newport. FEMA and REMA have designated specific evacuation routes in case of emergency. So they're laid out, designated. Problem being, a lot of them cross through the floodplain. And we have many miles, many feet of roadway that intersect the floodplain, which would kind of defeat the purpose of having an evacuation route. We have 200 named roads in Newport that go through the floodplain. We also have 968 historic structures in the floodplain with an assessed value of $559,000 plus. Million, excuse me. Newport also partnered with the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Society and Heritage Commission to work on a certified local government grant for historic preservation. We identified Rhode Island's historic assets in the coastal floodplain and then presented this data to a consultant who then identified all the applicable flood regulations with historic assets. This is going to be used to lay the groundwork to develop a strategy to protect Rhode Island's historic assets threatened by flooding. Some of the methodologies we used, we identified the coastal floodplains. We identified the affected communities, identified historic sites, applicable historic districts, historic candidate sites, and also looked at individual sites that were not within a district or a candidate site that still had historic value. 21 of Rhode Island's 39 communities have historic assets in the floodplain. In Bristol County, you can see the numbers here. Kent County. Newport County. Newport by far with the highest concentration. Providence County. And Washington County. You see some of the larger numbers in North Kingston, South Kingston, and Westerly. So it's not all gloom and doom. Newport is taking the lead in our North End Innovation Hub project to attract resiliency-based industries to locate in Rhode Island. Our survival as coastal communities depends on adapting to changing natural and man-made hazards. Newport seeks to attract companies whose business it is to research and develop new technologies that will increase our chances of survival as coastal communities. And are you ready for sea level rise?
Thank you very much, Melissa. Are any questions on this? Thank you very much. Oh, here's a question. Go ahead, Mark.
Excuse me. I was just curious, for all the exposed properties in those flood areas, have you looked to see how many of those actually have flood insurance? Do you know that?
We do. REMA has the numbers for that.
Right.
As far as I know, we do have a lot of policies in effect. Unfortunately, I don't have the immediate numbers.
I
but
think
I
it's about
those.
1,700. I don't know if
it was
Paul knows
1,900 locations are exposed. 1,700 is not bad then.
Yeah, and that's also based on, these are complete structures as well, so there may be policies that contain more than one structure.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, Teresa. Teresa's been here before. Teresa's a wealth of information on this subject. Thank you for coming again. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me, Representative Carson, and the House Commission. We appreciate being invited back. I'm actually standing in today for Pam Rubinoff at the Coastal Resources Coastal Resources Center at the University of Rhode Island. We're with Rhode Island Sea Grant at the Graduate School of Oceanography. Pam is actually in Newport today working with the Newport Restoration Foundation on a project, one of their properties in the Point neighborhood. So she sends her regrets and apologies.
Let me interrupt you there and share with the people what's going on. The Restoration Foundation in Newport is pulling together an international conference called Keeping History Above Water, and I would suggest you call them for information about their conference. That conference is in April, and today and tomorrow they're running a charrette on a particular piece of property in the Point neighborhood at 74 Bridge Street, looking at ways, bringing in a host of stakeholders to begin a discussion about how to build resiliency into those historic properties that are in the Point. And I'm hoping to go tomorrow. I know it's a 2-day event. I'm hoping to go tomorrow. So there's a lot of work there, and I would encourage any from the press is here to really research that intersection of historic preservation and flooding, given the fact that there's 989 historic properties in Newport in the flood zone. It's an important issue to us.
So our office have been working on several projects in the city of Newport to really look at the issues of business resilience and think about what some of these properties in the coastal high hazard area would need to start to renovate and adapt over time to be more resilient. So I have 5 different projects listed here, but I really want to take a minute just to really emphasize that through all the projects I'm going to share with you guys today, partnerships, collaborations, and our funding partners have been key in keeping the momentum moving on this. We have many collaborators on these projects. It's not just the Coastal Resources Center, Rhode Island Sea Grant working alone. We're working with all the state agencies, the City of Newport, different nonprofits, neighborhood groups in the community, and also our funding partners from both state funding sources and also our private foundations. So that's really been key in keeping the momentum moving on all of this. I'm going to go over 3 of our projects today. One is focused on a Newport, what we called a rapid assessment tour of waterfront businesses in Newport Harbor. That led to a conference that was held at Salve Regina last December on, we called it Staying Afloat, and all the proceedings are available online. It focused on adapting waterfront businesses to rising seas and extreme storms. You've already heard from Grover Fugate back at the October meeting about the Shoreline Change Special Area Management Plan. We are, I serve as the project coordinator for that effort with Grover, so there's a link there between the statewide SAMP, beach SAMP as we affectionately call it, and the work going on in Newport. And we also were able to secure a grant from the Department of Interior called the GRIP, the Green and Resilient Infrastructure Projects. We call it Get a Grip on Rhode Island's coastline. And that's an effort to marry green infrastructure techniques in a coastal setting. And as to build on what Melissa just shared with you, we do have a small grant to look at sharing the results of the CLG grant on and the inventory of historic assets statewide, and to start a community conversation in Newport about what some of the issues, opportunities, and challenges are. A lot of the resources I'm going to share with you today are saved and available to anybody on the Beach SAMP website. It's beachsamp.org. We've made an effort to try to sort these out into municipal resources, waterfront business resources, and then for coastal property owners. So I encourage you to check that out. In Newport, we've obviously seen some pretty extreme storms over the past few years, so we want to, as we're going through and communicating these issues, it's important to make the distinction between what impacts storms have on our landscape, and also take a look at the water lines to ensure that we're thinking about this in terms of future sea level rise, and that some of the storm surge levels, and this is Ann Street Pier in Newport behind the Newport Armory. This is Tropical Storm Irene. We're likely to see these kinds of water levels as the new normal twice a day, every day in the future. In Superstorm Sandy, the star is in the wrong place on the map, but this is Siemens Church Institute in Bowen's Wharf. We had 4 feet of surge over mean high water. And there's a kayaker in the middle of Bowen's Wharf in this image. But again, we've seen these water levels in recent years, and it's allowing us to really look at our mapping and ensure that we are on the right track with modeling to be better prepared to make sure the businesses in Newport Harbor and other coastal areas around the state are starting to think about how to adapt long term. The state-accepted data source for estimating sea levels in the future is based on an Army Corps of Engineers site. This is the Army Corps Sea Level Change Curve Calculator. where we're able to, we have NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and Army Corps estimates for sea level rise in the future. CR, the Coastal Resources Management Council in Rhode Island, is working close to accepting this as their accepted data source in the coastal policy in Section 145 of the Red Book. They are going to reference this source as the sea level rise projections moving forward. So this is, we've been vetted across different state agencies and what we're looking at. So if we're looking at 20 years from now, we're looking about 1 foot of sea level rise, 2050, almost 2 feet of sea level rise, 2065, 3 feet, and then over 6.5 feet by 2100. When we started, considering how to reach out to different waterfront businesses in Newport Harbor as a pilot study, we wanted to think about 2 different conditions: vulnerability to tides, storm inundation, flooding, and sea level rise. And we were able to learn from Superstorm Sandy to really, understand what Newport's waterfront buildings experienced during that condition. We also want to think about vulnerability to wind. And just last year, this is the sloop Providence that was dry docked in Newport Harbor, was subject to strong winds and toppled over. So we want to think about these waterfront businesses and the vulnerability or susceptibility to wind damage. So the 3 businesses that we coordinated with and were very fortunate to work with were the Stevens Church Institute, Bowen's Wharf, next to Bowen's Wharf in Newport, the Newport Shipyard, and also Sail Newport were our partners in this and worked with us to better understand some of their challenges and issues moving forward. And we focused on providing recommendations for wind damage, storms and flooding, tides and sea level rise. We compiled a panel of experts, structural engineers, architects, both local and from other places, North Carolina, et cetera. The Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety came up and participated in this to really provide the most innovative and state-of-the-art resources to our businesses to learn how they can make long-term improvements, both structurally and also non-structurally or operationally procedures for their business operations. And all of this report and this information is all, again, contained on beachstamp.org. From this, we were also able to create an adaptation catalog for businesses, and this we did an annotated PowerPoint that anybody can download and use in different meetings or discussions. We did provide 20 hard copies to Quonset for QDC for distribution to their businesses. And this is just, again, a quick guide that shows some techniques that have been tried and true in different areas of the country and are just, again, a resource for our businesses to learn from and start to think about how to minimize damage from storms. And it offers some general considerations for adaptation, considering floodproofing, raising utilities, upgrading stormwater drainage, that kind of information. We also, Pam Rubinoff in our office has been working closely with the building commissioner for the state of Rhode Island and with Grover Fugate from CRMC to bring the fortified program to Rhode Island. And there was a recent article in the Providence Journal about some homes in South County that are being built with a fortified standard in mind to better withstand storm damage. So there are more, after that article ran, there have definitely been more inquiries into this program, and I think you'll see that more property owners are exploring this. But I think this is an important resource that we're providing to the businesses and understanding sort of where the trade-off is with reinforcing your business, reinforcing your structures, and sort of what you can wait till it breaks versus investing in proactively. We recently received a grant to embark on business continuity planning for 2016, so I'll just put that out there as a stay tuned. We want to, our office wants to work with businesses in Newport to understand where businesses are with business continuity planning and use the available resources and checklists that are currently available through the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety and also for FEMA, and just test drive that with different businesses and the Chambers of Commerce to understand what resources businesses really need. That's a quick summary of the Business Resilience Program. We also have been working, the CRC and with statewide partners, working on green and resilient infrastructure in the coastal environment. And this is a few slides from a presentation that Scott Wheeler, the Parks Director for the City of Newport, and Pam Rubinoff shared with some of the boards and commissions in the city of Newport. The effort here is to take what we've learned from green infrastructure that has been implemented for stormwater management and apply it in a coastal setting, which has a whole different set of different types of exposure and set of conditions in a coastal environment, and figure out what might work. So we have a multidisciplinary team of people from the University of New Hampshire, different parties around Rhode Island, to look at this in 3 pilot sites across the state. We're looking at Marine Avenue in Newport, which is next to the Cliff Walk. We have Oakland Beach in Warwick, and then downtown Wickford in North Kingstown. 3 different landscape typologies that are allowing us to illustrate the implementation of green infrastructure techniques in a coastal setting. So in the Marine Avenue site in Newport, the idea here was to look at stormwater runoff and its convergence with the ocean water, and also a very high visibility, high profile public access and public amenity in terms of with the Cliff Walk being as heavily used as it is. We're able to start to explore ideas for how you can design, plan, and also regulate stormwater management and coastal factors, coastal influences here, and also be able to teach people about green infrastructure and its applicability to sites like this. So we can see this as a win-win opportunity to look at stormwater, coastal conditions, and the idea here, we want to improve water quality, reduce runoff, erosion, and enhance public access. That project is still underway. We have our multidisciplinary team of experts working together to look at some schematics and detailed designs to apply to these sites, to look at infiltration of stormwater treatment and enhancing a public space. And a result of that will be some technical drawings that could be plug and play, as we're calling it, in different and shared with different parts of the state. The last project I want to just give a quick overview on is the Historic Asset and Resource Resilience Project. This is a small grant where we have been asked to bring together kind of a collaborative community conversation about some of the opportunities and constraints of preserving or maintaining, managing historic assets over time with these new risk factors with coastal hazards in play. As Representative Carson mentioned, the Newport Restoration Foundation is putting on a conference in April called the Keeping History Above Water that will take place in Newport. Also that same month, the Rhode Island Historic Preservation Heritage Commission is holding their annual Rhode Island Preservation Conference in Wickford on April 30th. So that's a one-day event in Wickford. So we have a couple of different conferences that same month focusing on parts of this topic. The work that we are advancing really plays off of the Certified Local Government grant that Melissa Barker just shared with you. We want to be able to share the findings that Melissa just shared with you with a broader audience, engage different parts, boards and commissions in Newport, the Historic District Commission, residents of different neighborhood associations and other stakeholders across the city, and share examples from other places, the policy framework that's contained in that report that Melissa shared with you. And through our strategy in that is to go out and interview different stakeholders across the community and identify themes and challenges and opportunities that we can all work together and go after grants or go after opportunities or come up with new policies that will better enable historic asset managers or owners to be resilient over the long haul. So we've asked questions of, what do you gain by having historic status? What are the trade-offs between preserving the historic integrity of your property and floodproofing? What are some of the challenges with height restrictions or the ability to voluntarily elevate your property, such like that? So that's still in play, in progress. The next steps are to summarize our findings from the interviews. We'll be doing a booth or a display at the Keeping History Above Water Conference. We're leading a walking tour at the Rhode Island Preservation Conference in Wickford. And in the city of Newport, the plan is to have a public lecture event to share the report that Melissa shared with you and also the findings of our interviews, have a community workshop, and then compile recommendations to advance the conversation on this locally. So with that, that's a quick summary of the 3 projects that the Coastal Resource Center at URI have going on, and we've been really fortunate to have great partners and collaborators to work with on these efforts and hope to continue that.
Thank you, Teresa. I have one question. I'm not sure you can answer. You may refer us to Pam. I was wondering if you could just speak, if at all, about the work being done with the building commissioner in the state with respects to some of these risks and some of these remedies.
This is in terms of the building code. There have been meetings and conversations with the building commissioner. I can't speak to the details on that, but definitely the fortified program. I mean, it's very similar to the LEED green building certification where you have different levels. And I think there's definitely been some very close collaboration with the building commissioner, but I can't talk about the details in terms of what the process is for updating the building code or what might be mandatory versus we've been referencing the fortified program as a Code Plus program. So currently it's voluntary, and the effort has been to educate the Rhode Island Builders Association and other builders, realtors, and et cetera to get those stakeholders more fluent in this program and see if there's a market for it in Rhode Island. That was my alarm. But the details of the building commissioner's coordination, I can't speak on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for Teresa? Thank you very much, Teresa. Thank you again. Next, Mr. Paul Carroll. Paul Carroll is the Director of Civic Investment for the City of Newport. And Paul has a few ideas about maybe this is an opportunity for us.
Right.
And I thought we should end on a high note a little bit on this commission and hear about what the opportunities might be, Paul. That's why you're here.
Thank you. Because particularly where part of it is being civic investment for the City of Newport is a key area is economic development. Sometimes when you see those numbers, you're thinking, why did I ever take this position, particularly for development in a city like Newport? But actually, when you look at those challenges, and this is one of the areas that, Newport is very concerned about the risks, looking at climate change, looking at the issues of sea level rise, storm surge. But the other side of it is that Representative Carson did say, Newport has also been really looking for the last 3 years on what are the opportunities also associated with climate change. It's a little bit an odd thing to say, particularly after I think you've done these 3 different meetings, particularly in the 3 different communities. But really what we've looked at is how do you take integrated resiliency and take a coastal, built-out historic city and really look at what happens with integrated resiliency, particularly focused on the issues of ocean-related climate change. And when we talk about integrated resiliency, Newport has a little bit of a different take on some of the other definitions for resiliency. We're basically talking about the synergies of both the challenges and opportunities between and among the built and natural environment, the economics, the social, political, educational, cultural, and health. So it's really a systems approach to see this as an opportunity. And we actually look again as 3 stages for integrated resiliency. The first stage is the shock. The shock could be a disaster, a natural disaster. It could be a cyber attack on the energy systems or the grid systems, or it could be a combination of it. So the first stage really is how do you just surviving the shock, getting beyond that shock. The second area is where we refer to as sustainability. That's actually learning from the shock. What did you do right? What did you do wrong? Could you have actually avoided the shock in the first place? What would you take forward to the next area, to the next shock? And that's where in the next area we actually separate sustainability from resiliency. And in sustainability, usually sustainability and resiliency are used interchangeably. But we really say that there's another third step in resiliency, and that's how do you profit from the shock? So it's take the education that you learn, the examples that you brought forward, the new technologies, the new systems from the period of sustainability, from surviving and learning from the shock, and profiting from that. That's either as a first adopter of new technologies, being more competitive in the ability to apply compared to other locales, or the ability to actually export that knowledge to other locales. One thing that we've said for the last 3 years in Newport is, Newport, this is not new to Newport, and it's not new to Rhode Island. We've been doing this for 376 years around the ocean. We've had sportsmen sailors go out. We've had rum runners go out. We've had slavers go out. We've had military people go out, commercial traders in the ocean. They've been hit by a shock. It could be a storm. If they were fortunate and they got back to harbor, they then started to learn what did they do right, what did they do wrong. In some of these areas, it made them much more competitive in our high times of trading. Otherwise, we also adopted new technologies and new designs. So that was sustainability. Then we exported that knowledge in either being highly competitive or export of new designs. So what we're saying in resiliency right now, particularly in this changing environment, it's in our DNA. It's just another set of circumstances the ocean provides as both challenges and opportunities. We actually see the opportunities for integrated resiliency in the ability to be a national test case. We are an applied system. We're looking at a major development in the north end right as you come off of the Pell Bridge. But we're actually looking at the whole city as a potential test to look at what do you do in this time of period of ocean change and climate change, ocean-related climate change. So we're looking at the city as itself as a test case. We're also looking at the city, the potential to be a convening of best ideas and benchmarks, bringing people together and saying, what do we do wrong? What do we do right? What can we share with each other and really improve ourselves? The other area that we really look at is specifically the opportunities around resiliency in employment and job creation, retention and creation. Some very strong areas, and some of the things that we've actually been testing out in the national market and now the global market, strong opportunities in the sciences and STEAM and these opportunities. We also see on the other side, specifically with one of our more important core sectors in the state of Rhode Island, the building trades. From some of the development that we'll be doing or moving forward with the development, you'll have the traditional construction type of employment. In addition to that, we're focusing heavily on green infrastructure. And through the green infrastructure, nationally and globally, green infrastructure is becoming a very strong and growing global sector. We see ourselves as an application center, and what we're trying to recruit and do in Newport is the opportunity to be first adopters. So that really provides opportunities of employment for sectors of individuals right now that have never done this before. So we can actually come forward and move forward with this, with the building trades. We have been working very strongly with the Building Trades Coalition to really see how we can bring this together and bring it to a benefit, not just for Newport, but all of Rhode Island. And what's happened is we would like to actually have Rhode Island to start to look at itself. Newport is looking at itself in these terms, but we'd like Rhode Island to really start to look at itself as a place for this type of innovation. We'd also like to have Rhode Island to start to realize we actually have the ability to be a national and global test center for this type of innovation. And one of the great advantages of Rhode Island at this period is that size actually does matter, and it's actually in our favor. When we've been testing these ideas in the financial industries as well as the technology industries and some of the places nationally and globally, we are able to show the fact that everything is evidence-based. So the successes that we have early here in Newport and by extension in Rhode Island, we're able to be first adopters and export this. They see this very strongly as an opportunity to test for other markets, and that's the feedback. Those areas that we're not successful, and part of innovation, part of testing, really is about success and failures. You learn from both. Those types of failures, if it happens here, we've tested and used ourselves as a test, it doesn't affect the national economy. And this is the response we've been getting from the financial markets and the financial institutions, particularly in New York and overseas. So what's happened is over the 3.5 years as we've been doing this, we've actually tested these opportunities. We've gone out, we've attended, in fact, we've briefed the House up here a few times, and we've gone out to groups in New York and in D.C., and now we're going out into Europe and having strong feedback, particularly from French organizations. And they're seeing some of the leaderships around the changes for resiliency. And what we found out from the responses from some of the major global infrastructure investment groups, global consultancy firms, some of the top universities that are looking at these issues, not just from sustainability, but actual application of technologies, as well as some climate change leaders, Newport had actually put together a system that they hadn't seen before in the United States. And they really started to look at the system and say, you're on to something. You're on to something very different in innovation around resiliency. And what happened was that from that period, we were able to go out, and this has been a 3-year process. We actually went out into the market and started to test. And we actually have about 12 resiliency-related projects, initiatives, and efforts. We went out to the market and we said, you know, we're the city. There's just so much the public sector can do. We wanted to attract the private sector in as early as possible. So through the process, we went out and did an RFP to actually go out to get a primary project advisor and strategic partner. And this primary project advisor and strategic partner, what we asked them to do is to take a look at these projects that we're trying to do, figure out which of those projects have real strong potential for funding in the private sector, which will be a combination of public-private funding, which will be for the abilities for the growing impact investor and family foundations and family funds. And then also, which of those Paul should never even have thought of in those last 3 years and just basically eliminate. From that process, we did a national RFP. We were able to come down with a consortium of 3 major groups. These groups are Infolinks Capital. Infolinks Capital has done almost $220 billion nationally and globally on the areas of infrastructure financing for private sector and public sector projects. The second group is the Lewis Berger Group. And all that you were discussing earlier about some of the cultural opportunities, the Lewis Berger Group actually came forward and has been developing what's called a resilience engine. We started having the conversations with them as the part of the consortium. They've been trying to get communities in the United States to understand that this is an opportunity as well as a challenge. They were actually kind of surprised that Newport was coming forward with a similar suggestion. So Lewis Berger is part of the consortium, and the final part of the consortium is Gilbane Construction. So we have a great national construction group with strong and important Rhode Island ties, particularly moving forward in the green infrastructure. And then to complement that, their legal structure and their legal representation is Denton's Law Firm, which is now the largest law firm in the earth, the globe. And they've really been strong, particularly on the issues of public-private investment in foundations. And what this consortium actually said when they were looking at this was the real strength that we have is 3 areas, and the reason they were interested. We're seeing it as a systems. And they really said that this is key if you're looking at the resiliency from both the challenges as well as the opportunities. It's a systems approach. They also said that, we really need to recognize that with all of these challenges, just like any other time in the history of the United States, incredible challenges also mean incredible economic development opportunities, and really bring that forward. And I do a little bit when we kind of push back against the definition usually of sustainability and resiliency being interchangeable. If someone said to me, God forbid, I walked out there and I got hit by a car, and they said, Mr. Carroll, with a lot of work, you can have a sustainable life, I may say, kind of pull the plug. If you say, Mr. Carroll, through changes and really working, you not only can have a sustainable, but you can have a resilient life and a better life. That is a key that we've heard both in Washington, in New York, and overseas. It's something that's missing in the conversation for the United States right now. That the issue is these are challenges, but they're also opportunities, and how to engage, particularly the young people, to recognize them as opportunities. The final areas that I'd just like to focus in is I was asked to actually make some recommendations for it, and we've been trying to do this, and I think you have incredible background knowledge of the challenges. What I'd just like the committee from both the public sector as well as the members that are in the private sector to really look at the first recommendation. These challenges represent opportunity. Really understand that. I hope that that gets forward in the state. The second is really recognize, and this is what's been really driving our need to go out to the private sector, with the diminishing financial resources at the Fed, state, and local levels, the private sector needs to be involved at the very beginning. And I'm going to ask the public sector members to say, we really don't know it all. And sometimes when we talk about doing public sector projects, we scope out the project, we come forward, and then we say to the private sector, how would you help fund this? That's not really a public-private partnership. And the other side for the private sector, just to realize that the public sector does have mandates that the private sector does not live under. So what we have the opportunity really right now is to figure out what the system of bringing the private and public sector in at the beginning of projects to meet the needs of the community and to meet the needs of the private sector if we're looking for that type of funding. So I'd ask you not to get caught in the traditional U.S. way of doing public-private partnerships. Really have it be a systems and be an approach. Then also finally, just to realize that this challenge and these opportunities, and this is what the great opportunity around climate change, is too large for any one organization or one group to take care of. It's too large for the public sector. It's too large for the private sector. Investment foundations, those types of things. This is a great opportunity for us to really start to test how to bring it into systems where all needs as well as all opportunities are realized. And I thank you, and I thank you really, Representative Carson, for having Newport here, and you can see what this is an important area for our community. I thank you.
Thank you, Paul, very much. Are there any questions for Paul?
Yeah, I have a question. So, related to your opportunities and challenges. So one of the big opportunities when there's a big event, a hurricane or whatever, there's your chance to rebuild because there's so much damage done that you're forced to rebuild. But I see a big tension between, on the one hand, people wanting to rebuild and get life back to normal as quickly as possible versus being more thoughtful about how they rebuild and doing it in a way that makes them more resilient. How do you deal with that challenge? If people want to get back in their house, they want to get their business up, they want to get up and running again, but you have an opportunity to make things better than it was before.
Well, this is actually really an important part, and I think this is really where potentially this commission can help make recommendations at both the state and local level. You have an opportunity. My personal opinion is we're living on borrowed time. You know, the category, we haven't had a Category 3. And the Category 3 type of event, which could even be more devastating, could be a winter event. And this is one of the things we're looking at. So I think we're really living on borrowed time. So each year that it doesn't happen, we've been given a little bit of a reprieve. We're not free, we've just been given a reprieve. It would really be strong and helpful now to have the state and the local communities to start to looking at their zoning and actually have maybe potentially two encouragements for different types of zoning and building at the waterfront before that disaster happens. Because your concern is once it happens, they want to get back into their houses, they want to get, in which they should. The opportunity now is if we continue to have a little bit of these reprieves before that one hits us, actually offer the opportunity for different types of zoning. That maybe it's more density, maybe it's more height at the waterfront, but that you allow it to be brought out of the floodplain. All those things that the CRC is trying to do with Fortify, bring those in as incentives now, but make sure that those are the ordinances that you will rebuild to post-disaster. So the ability for fast tracking in communities, the ability for transparency, making it a little bit not easier to get around zoning, but really use that as an incentive. And then just make sure that those stronger stronger building codes are in place post-disaster. Because if it happens to us once, it's going to happen to us continually. So just building it back, you're going to lose it from a financial pretty quickly. I don't know if that answers your question. I think there are those opportunities.
It does. Thank you.
Mark, did you have a question?
I had a very similar question. Do you have any sense as to whether because all this resiliency, building up, fortify, it costs more money. Is there any reluctance, or is there certain types of projects that private industry will invest in, or that they're shying away from because of the the risk along the shoreline, where perhaps decreasing property values, or particular areas that really aren't going to work anymore? I mean, obviously, if your house goes away in a hurricane and you can't get insurance, right, you may not rebuild unless you're a multimillionaire.
Right.
But are there particular industries or particular projects that are more favorable for these areas than others?
I think what you're looking at, again, is if you look at the systems approach, because one of the other, part of the area people talk about evacuation of the coast, moving back from the coast, various areas. These are all part of a whole system, but we also have to remember already 70% of urban people or urban areas are within, I think it's 45 miles of the coast worldwide. So what's happening now is what might not have been, and again, a lot of these predictions are now starting to enter in the actuary tables for insurances and for businesses, for business continuity, business insurance. So I think that what you're going to see is there'll be certain areas and certain communities around that may make sense to let it go back and to evacuate from it and offset it. But it really is, how do you start to recognize that we're living in an era where increasingly the design that's going to happen, the projects that are going to happen, are going to be, water is going to be part of it. It's going to inundate. So we really need to start to figure out, when you have your logistics, when you have your financial institutions, when you have your transportation systems, your education systems, your healthcare, all at threat. We either totally evacuate from the coast worldwide, or we start to look at the projects. And that's what's really important when we say getting the private sector in first. One of the groups that actually is involved in us, some of their principals come from Greenwich, Connecticut. And it's really interesting. After Sandy, most of the people in New York were highly impacted by Sandy. But some people actually lost their homes. I mean, they burned. In places like Greenwich, they had large amounts of disasters. It became personal. It became personal for a lot of the people in the financial institutions. So I'd really encourage, and this is why they're responding to us, what we're trying to do, that they're looking for test areas to really figure out how to make this work. We have that opportunity in Newport and Rhode Island to be those people. So I think in those types of industries. And the other side of it is it's not just the storm that comes in and wipes out your house. We're on Aquatic Island. We're an island community. Or I should probably say when, we have a Category 3, let's be realistic. If it follows the 54 or the 38 hurricane tracks, it will impact New York and it will impact Boston. We're probably 30 to 45 days on our own. And we really need to understand that. And sometimes up here, when you come up to and I never use this coming from Boston, upstate Rhode Island when I lived in Massachusetts, but when you do come up from South County or from Newport County, there's a tendency to believe in Providence and other areas that, maybe we're not susceptible as much as you are on the coast. Remember, your transportation systems, your rail, your roads are going through Connecticut. They're going through lowlands. They're at sea level or some places below sea level. You've got an energy grid. In 54, we did not have the energy grid, and we did not have the Eisenhower transportation system, the road systems. Those are all at risk now. So even if you're not on the coast for these events, you need to start to realize what we're looking at is how do you use alternative energies? How do you use the debris potentially as energies? What do you do for microgrids? What do you do for the cyber that needs to protect those microgrids? So those investments that we're seeing and the interest we're seeing is through a whole spectrum in the systems of what could be the challenge and what could be the opportunity.
For Paul?
Thank you.
That was very useful, Paul. Thank you very much. Okay, our final speakers today, we have two gentlemen that I wanted to come and tell us a little bit about what their experience is. Please come up and join us. I would like you to introduce yourself, please, for the record. These two gentlemen fish in Newport, and I was at an event about 3 months ago, and I met this gentleman, and I thought it was a real opportunity to ask him exactly what he sees out there. What do you see out there in the water? And we didn't get to finish our conversation that day. We got somewhat interrupted by somebody else, but I never forgot the things that you said to me. And so I thought to put a real human face on this in terms of a real industry in Rhode Island, that it would be really good to hear from you gentlemen as to exactly what you've seen over your career out there on the water and what your observations are. So please introduce yourselves and tell us what you see out there.
My name is David Spencer. I'm an offshore lobsterman from Newport, Rhode Island. I've fished out of Newport since 1973. My primary area of operation is along the edge of the continental shelf in close proximity to the Gulf Stream. I'd like to let Denny go first, if I could. I think he has a more local perspective.
My name is Denny Ingram. I own a inshore lobster boat in Newport. I tie up along with Dave at the State Pier in Newport, which actually is an area that was filled in. I saw that on the map earlier today. And I've been fishing for probably about 30 years in and around Narragansett Bay, near shore Rhode Island waters. And all I can tell you, just from what I've seen, and it almost seems to be accelerating, in the last 10 years there's been some serious changes in what we see. And the first being, I would say, is all of our lobsters, it seems to me, that they're all running out of the shoaler inshore waters. They seem to be running deeper towards the ocean. They're leaving Narragansett Bay, which just tells me that something is warming. There's something they don't like. I do think it's a warming of the waters. On the other hand, we see different species kind of filling in where the habitat may not be perfect for lobster. We see an explosion in the crab population here in Rhode Island, and that's something that I think we can take advantage of. There could be some species filling in where these things are leaving. I think we have to figure out a way to to manage all this stuff. It's happened rapidly. It really is. In the last 10 years, it really has changed a lot. I was thinking about this on the way up. Everything that we see seems to be later in the year. For instance, like we used to see a fall run. I was thinking about this fall in particular. What we call as a fall run is when we start to catch lobsters. It would normally be around the end of October. We would see it early November. We'd start to see the lobsters start to shed and feed again. All of a sudden now, it's like the end of December. We don't see them in October or November anymore. And if you think about it, just think about this past fall we've been through. December seemed like October. I mean, it's just everything is a little bit out of whack. Everything is a few months to us. It seems to be a few months late. So we have to adapt to this, and we have to get our local scientists, get our national, federal scientists. They all have to adapt to this too. So as far as managing all of us, I know it really has nothing to do with sea rise, what we're seeing. I mean, there's nothing we can do about that. But what we've seen in the different species, the way things are changing, this is real and it's happening. So,
to build a little bit upon what Denny
Please introduce yourself for the record.
I'm sorry, David Spencer, Newport, Rhode Island. I can give you observations on, the water's warmer, the Gulf Stream seems to be moving a little more actively. We get arms of the Gulf Stream that come and interrupt our fishing. We get many more warm core rings than we ever used to. There's a lot, as Denny said. It's unmistakable. There are changes in the last 10 years that seem to be rapid and relatively intense. And it's not just all warming. I think last year, in the marine environment, we had some of the coldest sea surface temperature, followed almost instantly by some of the warmest. It was a really quick flip-flop. So there's a lot of things going on, but both Denny and I are lobstermen. I think we've seen molting seasonality change. We've seen the length of the molt change. We've seen it appears that lobsters stay softer, which means they don't really get out of their molt for quite a long time. Now, whether this is ocean acidification or not, I'm not sure. That's one of my biggest concerns, not for only for lobsters, but for clams, quahogs, all shellfish and crustaceans. That's something that could have a real impact on us. But to build a little bit upon what the last gentleman was speaking about, I don't think everything has to have a negative connotation. As Denny alluded, some of our species, lobster seems to be moving out of the bay into the more near shore because the habitat seems to be a little more suitable. But we've also had an explosion of crab population. We have blue crabs in Narragansett Bay that, there's no commercial fishery allowed on this, but they are populating the bay. The Jonah crab population has just exploded exponentially, both near shore and offshore. Black sea bass are here in abundance that nobody has ever seen. So my point is, I think there will be winners and there'll be losers. Some of the species will go and seek alternative habitats that are more conducive, but there are other areas are going through this, and we will probably inherit some of their fish. What I think both of us feel, in order for industry to survive and to adapt to this and to mitigate the effects of the climate change, we need an adaptive and flexible management system. We need a system that can be as adaptive and flexible and change as rapidly as our environment is. And that is going to be critical to keeping the local fishing industry vital through all of this. Currently, we don't have such a system. And we're saddled with a system that's prone to not readily recognizing over-harvesting of some species and perpetuating under-harvesting of healthy ones. And this inability to adapt costs the industry millions, and therefore the state and federal economy, state and local economy, as well. A good management system is highly dependent on getting good scientific advice as to the status of the stocks. And this good scientific advice is highly dependent on the quality and quantity of the data that scientists need and use to populate stock assessments. State and federal surveys are the typical collectors of this data. Most surveys were designed when conditions were relatively static. Today's environment is anything but. There's been a reluctance to kind of get off the old protocols. The state surveys are pretty much strictly bound to 3 miles, 3 miles and at the same time we have populations that are moving offshore. So more data is desperately needed that is collected on a year-round basis and over a greater spatial distribution. The obvious and economical solution is to solicit industry to be equal partners in this data collection program. We understand budget constraints probably won't allow both the federal and state data collectors to really to do any more than they're doing. So it just seems obvious that industry needs to become equal partners in that project. Some of this exists today, but needs to be expanded exponentially. Scientists and fishermen need to grow to gain a much higher level of trust between each other and become true partners. And I think this is the only way that the fishing industry can stay vital and solvent through these challenging times. I thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very, very much. Well, what stands out to me today is that we probably need to make some recommendations around continue to engage the private sector in this conversation, which was one of my hopes for this commission, that we would really, there are a vast number of issues associated with flooding and sea rise and warming seas. And there's the environmental side, there's the transportation side, and my hope was that we would raise the economic issues here and really engage industries. We engaged the tourism industry in our first session. When we discussed Westerly. We're talking today. We didn't even talk about tourism in Newport. Obviously, that's another huge industry that will be affected there. We've heard from the fishing industry, and when we discussed Providence, there was a myriad of businesses that were there. So thank you for coming, because I really want to engage the business community in this conversation. So are there any general questions from anyone? We have one more session. I think, and that's February 25th. We moved it back 1 week from our regular third Thursday to the fourth Thursday, because the third week of February, the House and Senate have a break. And we'll, if you get your summaries to Kendra by February 10th, we can have a conversation about those. We also have a whole host of recommendations by all of our speakers, which the staff has been collecting, which will also be in the final report. I'm going to try to figure out a way to get them to you folks so you can take a look at those for our last session. So I want to thank everybody from coming up, especially everybody from Newport. Thanks a lot, and have a good evening.